Hello, today we're going to use the SketchBook Express drawing application for iPad to create an illustration of a snowman at night. Let's review the SketchBook Express drawing application icons. Please repeat them after me. Gallery, add new sketch, I for information, undo arrow, redo arrow, brush editor, draw styles, free draw, line tool, rectangle tool, circle tool, symmetry, text, transform, layers. Let's look at our illustration for a moment. Our snowman is made of 3 spheres, a small, medium, and large sphere. We're going to use the circle tool to outline those spheres, and then we're going to use white and different shades of blue to create the light and the shadow on our snowman. We'll recognize the fact that our moon is in the top left-hand corner of our illustration. That means the light is falling across our screen in a diagonal from top left to bottom right. So shadows fall to the right. As we can see, looking at our snowman on the left, we can see the shadow that he creates on the ground. We can see the shadow from each part. The small, medium, and large spheres all create shadows on his body. Let's give it a try. You'll start by filling your background with blue and using your circle tool to create the moon and adding a white fill to it. After we do that, we're going to create a new layer to put our snowman on. So let's tap Layers and Plus to get a new layer. In our Layers palette, Plus creates a new blank layer. Plus would copy the layer that we already have. Flower Plus allows us to add in a photo, and the arrow allows us to merge layers. So on that new layer, we're going to use Circle Tool to go ahead and outline our snowman. So I select Circle Tool, and I'm going to use my pen tool, opacity all the way to the right at 1, and radius all the way to the left at 1. And I've gotten white on my pen tool by going to the top of the rhombus. Now when I draw circles, I always pull from the top left to the bottom right. Circles can be challenging to make on SketchBook Express, and if you pull down, you get a vertical oval. If you pull across, you tend to get a horizontal oval. So if you pull at a diagonal from top left to bottom right, you get a circle that's much more round. Now your circle doesn't have to be exactly in the middle of the screen, and it doesn't have to be perfectly round. But it's good practice to make your circles the same way every time by pulling from top left to bottom right. That helps you know where they're going to be placed when you put them on your sketch. Next, I'm going to try my medium circle. Now I know I'm drawing circles right now, but after I shade them, it will become apparent that they're actually spheres. But this lets me know where to do my shading at. Each one of these spheres sits on top of the one below it, so I am allowing them to overlap just a little bit. That's a good start. Now, I'm not going to use Fill Bucket to fill them with white. We are going to do some shading to fill them with white today, but first I want to do a little bit of erasing. I'm going to get Eraser B. I refer to all of the tools on the top row as the A tools, and all of the tools on the second row as the B tools. Let's get out Eraser B, turn opacity up, and keep radius fairly small. And we need to erase, using free draw, the part that overlaps. So now this looks a little bit more like the illustration on the left. I can see these are spheres. I can see that they are overlapping. Now, the main tool we're going to use to draw today is going to be pencil number 1. Let's get out pencil number 1 and put our radius at about 10 in the middle and our opacity at about 0.5, halfway up. The first thing we're going to do is add the ground around the snowman. And you'll see when we use pencil number 1 today, it gives us a broken line. Now this snowman is at night, and there's going to be shadows around on the snow, so I'm not going to color this in. I'm not going to use fill bucket to color it in, but I am recognizing that there are shadows. There's some little humps on the ground. So I'm not doing perfectly straight horizontal lines to shade in. I'm trying to reflect the curves and the bumps and the humps on the ground. And we've agreed there is bright light shining on the left-hand side of the snowman. So as I continue to create the ground on the right side, I'm going to turn my opacity down to about 0.25. And I'm going to do less shading on the right side of the snowman because we recognize the fact that there is more shadow on the right side of the snowman. So most of our shadows in this illustration are going to be represented by the blue, the light blue that we used as our background, and the dark blue that we're going to add to this picture. Now let's focus on each sphere one at a time and add some white shading to the left side. Now, as I shade the very far left part of the snowman, I can go over that a few times since my opacity is pretty low, and each stroke I make, the white becomes whiter. And as I shade more towards the middle of my snowman, I allow more of the blue to come through, and I do less layers of the white. I don't go over my white as much. See, if I keep going over this at the edge of the snowman, the white becomes purer and purer white. The more times you go over it. Now we want a little bit of that blue shining through, and I need to continue my shading over a little bit towards the middle of my snowman. And my lines, my strokes, reflect the shape of the sphere. Let's do some shading on the middle sphere. Now there is going to be an arm coming out of the snowman's body, and there will be a scarf around his neck, but we can cover over this with those colors that we'll be using. Again, at the very far left edge of the snowman, I'm going to shade very hard. Multiple passes to create a very pure white. And as I move towards the middle of the snowman's body, I do fewer strokes to allow more of that blue to show through the white. But towards the edge, I like to shade it in pretty solid. And let's do the top sphere. And of course, the hat is going to cover up part of the snowman's forehead, so we don't have to shade all the way to the top. And we can turn our opacity down to about 0.10 or 1/10 to add some even lighter strokes of white across our snowman. So there are the basic shapes for our snowman. Now we need to come back with our blue and add some shading. We're going to add some shadows. And we're going to actually cover up this white line for each of the three spheres on the right side of our snowman with a blue line and blue shading. Let's pick a medium blue from right in the middle of the rhombus. That's going to mix some gray in. If we came to the bottom of the rhombus, it would have a lot of black mixed in. And our shadows aren't going to be pure black. We want to get them kind of a medium blue. So I go to the middle blue on the color selector wheel and get a medium blue from the middle of the rhombus. Let's see how that's going to look. Let's zoom in and focus on the first sphere. My opacity is very low. Let's turn opacity back up to 0.50. We need to make that blue a little bit darker. Let's come down the middle of the rhombus a little bit to about right there. These shadows are very dark, and I'm trying to stay inside of that white line. It's okay if I let a little bit of the white line show through. Now I am going to add some more shadows to this. It's always easier to add more color. It's difficult to take it away. That looks good for right now. Let's do the middle sphere. And let's do the top sphere. Again, the snowman's hat is going to create a little bit more shadow on his face. And let's turn our opacity all the way down again to about 0.10. So that makes these shadows much, much lighter. So I can add just a little bit more shadow on top of the white. I'll do the same thing on each of those three spheres as I go back down the snowman's body so I can blend those blues together a little bit better. And again, the shadows help show the curves of the spheres. Spheres are round like a ball, so the shadows gently creep around the edges. And lastly, we're going to put our shadow on the ground. Let's turn our opacity all the way up to 1, because in a shadow, light is generally not allowed to pass through the object whatsoever. And our shadow is going to have some little bumps in it because our snowman is 3 spheres. So I should see 3 distinct spheres in our shadow. And I can shade it in very carefully. I'm going to shade it in completely. So we can agree now that the moon is in the top left and it's casting shadows down to the right. Now it's time to add some details to our snowman. But before I do that, I want to add just a few more shadows on the ground. So let me keep that same blue I had and turn our opacity back down to about 0.5. And just like before, we did some light shading. Anywhere there's not white, I'm going to come back and do a little bit of light shading of the blue. Because again, our ground has some little hills in it and some ridges. And we're just trying to reflect some of the shape of the ground. There's some high spots and some low spots. Not doing too much shading, just to add a little bit of variety and a little bit of interest here on the ground. Now let's add those details to the snowman. Let's start by adding his arms. So if you go to orange on the color wheel and then move across the rhombus, a little bit to the left of center, you'll find that orange turns brown when you mix black in with it. And let's draw the sticks for the snowman's arms. Then let's go to the top of the rhombus to get white. And let's add a little bit of snow and ice on those sticks. And to do that, we're going to turn our opacity down to about 0.10 or 1/10. Doesn't have to be exactly that. And we're going to turn our radius down to about 5. And let's focus on one arm at a time. Now the snow would pile up on top of this stick, especially in the part where the stick branches out. There would be a little bit of extra snow, and generally icicles would begin to form as well, especially at the end of the stick, where that snow might build on top of itself and start to hang down. So we can add some little icicles there, and a little bit more snow up on the very top part of the stick here. And let's do the same to the right arm. Let's add some snow on top of the stick. And a few icicles hanging down. Let's create a carrot nose for the snowman in the same way. We'll pick orange on the color wheel with opacity at about 0.5. Let's zoom in on the face and create that cone nose. A carrot is shaped like a cone. Since this is a very small item, we can just color it in instead of using fill bucket. It's a very bright orange carrot. I think I'm going to use a darker orange to go back over that. And now let's pick white on the color selector again. Take our opacity down to about 0.10. And let's add a little bit of snow on top of the carrot. And a few icicles hanging down from the snowman's nose. Let's go down the rhombus to very dark brown and increase our opacity back to 0.5 and increase our radius back to about 10. And let's add the eyes, the mouth, the buttons on the snowman. Now, traditionally, kids used coal for the eyes and the mouth and the buttons, but a lot of times we use what we can find, rocks or pieces of wood, or even buttons from your house. And now let's do our hat and our scarf. Now we don't want a green that is that bright, so let's move over towards the middle of the rhombus, mix in a little gray with our green. Remembering, of course, all this is at night, so things aren't going to be but so bright. Let's begin with the hat. Let's add the curve for the band at the bottom of the hat. Remember, part of this is going to go over the snowman's sphere and curve around the top of his head. And this snowman has a pretty cool ball on the top of his hat. So while we have that green out, let's add the fluff for that ball on top of his hat. And I'm going to keep this green to do